Welcome to AI driven perception, learning and mapping for drones course. We completed module 1 which talks about shallow neural network. We are entering into new module on convolution neural network. Here we are going to process image as an input data, right? This particular lecture is going to talk about on foundations of convolution neural network and introduction, some motivation to say why we need, what is the advantage, what's the disadvantage and where we could be useful, all that we are going to cover. In a nutshell, the outline of this particular lecture going to be covering why vision is hard. What is the image structure, right? We talk about the classical Hubble and Wiesel's experiment and talk about how the image structure being present. What's the limitation of fully connected neural network for vision problems? Then we just bring in the visual structure. Then we talk about a classical architecture called Neocognitron architecture to connect how close it is with respect to human visual cortex is. And then we also talk about very important feature, local feature, right? And the spatial network which is present in processing the visual data, right? Now, you see here, there is an image. It is a degraded image. What humans see is the image, right? But what computers see is only the numbers, a matrix of numbers. If I talk about in grayscale, it is one matrix. If I talk about RGB, there is a 3 different matrix representing the image that what we perceive, right? Moment I see a face, human immediately know a face should have very important feature organized in symmetrical fashion so that we can identify. We need 2 eyes, nose, a mouth, ear, right? And I want them in a right proportion and right location, then I can say it's a face, right? That's a high level information I am trying to decode to you. But the computer need to identify what does the eye really mean, what does the nose really means, what does the mouth really means. It has to build the structure, right, and extract the information so that it can identify the human face here, to be very specific, right. Once I say who is it, see it's a problem. First thing is I have to identify whether it's a face or not. Second, we have to say is the face belongs to whom? Abraham Lincoln or Washington or Obama, right, or Narendra Modi. We need to identify, right. That's very important. So what we are going to do, given a matrix of numbers, the neural network has to identify this particular face belongs to a specific person. When we say this, we will ask a question, how confident are you, right? That confidence is what we are representing in a bracket. The probability of this face belongs to Lincoln is 0.8, right? Winners take all. Whoever has the highest probability, and that is what we will use it as a potential face of a particular person, right? And it also has some similarity with other persons too, right? That is a similarity what you see, but we will look at always who has highest probability. So that comes into the category of classification. Sometimes we may have to do regression from the visual. We wanted to find out where the face is. Can you exactly bound the region of the face, right? With the rectangle, with the center and some coordinate, can you give me? That becomes a regression problem, right? Same visual input, I can get classification as well as regression. When I say classification, I am trying to see what is the probability of this image belongs to a specific class or a category, right. When I say regression, can you give me an output variable with a continuous value? Now, what is the challenge in visual perception? The moment image comes into picture, right, we are talking about lot of changes will happen in the way that you are perceiving, way either how the camera is seeing the environment, right? You could see an appearance change. Appearance could just happen due to lighting, scale, occlusion, variation, background clutter, all that will affect. For example, if you look at a viewpoint, you could have a statue. You could take a same face, and the face is, he's tilting his head. He can tilt the other way around also, right? These viewpoints can change either in the object itself or camera viewpoint can change. Scale can change. You can take an image far away, you can go closer and take an image. Scale variation comes into picture. Deformations. You see a cat here, usually head should be in the front between. Now here you see head is between the legs, right? So that kind of deformation can also happen. When you took an image, if you want to identify the cat, you said there should be a 4 legs and a head, but the head is between the legs, it's not a cat. Now the variation, you see the problem now, we talked about earlier, the data distribution should be sufficient for me to extract. Now I need to have all kind of viewpoint variation, I need to have all kind of scale variation, I need to have all deformations of the object so that I can recognize them. Not just deformation, I also need to take care of occlusion. The same cat is in front of the light source, right? And I see a shadow. I see only the head alone, right? Or I can see half the body. I can see only the leg alone, not the head. All possibility are there, right? Background clutter. The background is similar to the color of the cat. Then it's very difficult, right? And not just that, interclass variations. Moment I say interclass variation, you have different type of cats. Their colors different, right? How am I going to handle it? For example, if we talk about an apple, apple is a red in color. If you say you have a different shades of red is also possible. Green apple is also there. Pink apple is also there, right? So variations, the class variations is also very, very important. In addition, the illumination going to play in a role. If you see here, there is a penguin, there is a light source, right? You don't see 2 more penguin here, I am just pointing here in this. But that is visible if the light source is not at the center, if it is outside. Again, light source can vary, right? The position of the light source can vary. That will also affect. Sometimes the light source falls exactly on the camera, right? These problems is also adds complexity to understand the particular image. In a sense, if I talk about what I am looking at when I say object, right, that's an interesting problem. Once we say that other viewpoint and everything, now when it comes to object. Let's say I want to recognize a house. Moment I say a house, what comes to your mind? House means there should be a door, there should be a window, there should be a roof, there should be a chimney. Maybe if it's an independent house, if you are talking about apartment, it has a different meaning to it, right? Moment if I say a car, it should have wheel, right? 2 doors means it's a van, 4 door means car, 2 doors with a multiple window means it's a bus. You can differentiate like that. So doors, window, right, wheels are very important. Now if we talk about aircraft, how do I differentiate? Wheels are required. Aircraft, when it's on the runway, you will see the wheel, but in the air you don't see the wheel unless it takes off, and then we'll go inside to reduce the drag. The very important feature I will be looking for is the wing. If somebody gives me a number of doors and windows, then it has more windows. But if I have a new class, not just car, I have a train. Train has so many windows. How am I going to differentiate just by number of windows alone, right? So if I have to differentiate between the car and truck, I will have a difficulty. right? You see, extracting this feature is very, very difficult. You need someone who is an expert in that area to talk about these features, and they have to extract these features. See, it's easier if I talk about object recognition. Somehow you can bring up this what we call higher dimensional abstract attributes that we are looking for. But if we talk about a problem where I want to find the health of the structure, right? And there is a crack. How do I do it? I have an image, right? With that, how do I do it? What kind of features that I extract from there? What attributes that we are talking of here, right? That's a bigger problem. There's a classical experiment again, which was done in early stage to understand how human visual process take place, right? They have a stimulus, they put a rectangular strip, and there's a cat, and they put a small electrode in a visual area to understand how the cat sees this stimulus, right? Basically this experiment is conducted to understand the primary visual cortex of the human system, right? There are receptive fields in the visual cortex, how they are functioning, right? There are two types of cells they observed. One is a simple cell which responds to the orientation of the bar, right? The other one is a complex cell. It is position irrelevant, right? So you see there is a spatial, there is a attribute that I am trying to look at it, and which is acting like a stimulus. They did at different orientations and see the neuron response for different orientation. They recorded all this information to try to understand the primary cortex, right? In fact, this is the same experiment led to radial basis function. If you look at the stimulus for a different orientation, right? And the stimulus orientation is a maximum when it's at horizontal, right? The orientation, the stimulus goes down and it goes different angles. This also gave an intuition that how these visual cortex are locally tuned, right? They don't bother at what location of the image it is there, stimulus is a stimulus, right? So these are some understanding in early stages helped at different neural network to be developed. Now let's go in understanding this receptive field of a visual cortex. The V1 cells consist of neurons that activate depending on the orientation. There is a spatial, it is invariance to spatial. It just only look at the orientation. Where in the space it is present, it doesn't really matter. And there is a receptive field which has local importance to it, right? If I try to understand much deeper into this experiment, there is a simple cell, there is a complex cell, there is a hypercomplex cell. If I go deeper and deeper, right? So this is a visual pathway. What does it mean? Any object that we see, we extract some low level features. What is the low level features could be? It could be edges, right? We try to see the edge or the gradients, how the color variation happens, right? Then from there we construct some mid-level features. From mid-level features then we go to the higher level features, that's the attributes that we are talking about. When I gave an example of a car, house and aeroplane, we talked about attributes. What are the high level attributes that we are extracting, and we are human brain automatically construct this from what it sees as an edge. From there it projects to higher middle level to higher level to get the attributes. From there it can reconstruct this is a what type of airplane. It's a fighter, passenger, business jet, turbo. Based on the engines also it can vary, differentiate, right? And it can even identify whether it's an Airbus or Boeing, right? So we look for certain features at a higher level space and we try to connect it from low level and extract it automatically. So if we try to interpret little bit details what we observed, the V1 cells activate depends on orientation, whereas V2 cells consist of hierarchical organization of this orientation, right. And then I am trying to build the complex cell, and the complex cell is further going to hypercomplex to extract the information from the visual image that is presented to the human eyes or animal eye, right. Now what is the takeaway? If I am talking about deep learning or convolution neural network, what is my takeaway? Visual cortex is hierarchical and locally connected, right. Each layer builds more abstract representation of the information present, right. Finally it gets you an attributes which we can use to identify a specific person, right. So what happens? There is an information and retina, the eye sees the information, then you have LGN, then it goes to V1, V2, V4 like this and keep building, right. If I equate this to modern deep neural network, I have a sensor which gives me the RGB data, right, visual camera, and the RGB goes on to my network. I do some processing, extract some information, and then that information is further propagated. I keep filtering the data further and further and extract a complex attributes. That attributes are used to reason something or identify the human. For example, in the Lincoln example, it identifies that image belongs to Lincoln, or is the image belongs to Professor Suresh or Dr. Anirudh, who is also a teacher of this particular course, right. You will be able to identify who is this person, right. Now let us try to go deeper. For example, we take a task of face recognition, right. So we connect a small building stone. I said what is the feature that we are looking for? Eyes, nose, ear, mouth, right. I want these features, but these features alone is sufficient to say it is a face. Let us say there are two eyes, one eye in the top and one eye at the bottom of the face. Will you say it is a human? There is no symmetry on the vertical, it is the symmetry on the horizontal, right. Will you agree? Right. So these are the questions we need to really ask. At the end of the day, when I have these middle level features, I have to create a template which is a human, right. Again, face, for some of them it will be round, for some of them will have a sharp chin. All these are my template, right. I have to map it. Some may have some feature change in the long nose, sharp nose, right. They have a broad smile. So see, we are constructing a basic information, the edges and the gradient. Using the edges and gradient, we create a complex representation of an eye and a nose and a mouth and an ear. And with this mid-level features, we create a template and say this template is what I meant as a human face, right. So that is how these abstract representations are created from the basic low level features. Now what are the findings of this neuroscience experiment? What is the key finding? Local receptive field. Each neuron responds only to the local region. That is the reason we built a radial basis function network also, right. They have a hierarchical representation, hierarchical processing. Each layer builds abstract features. From edge, I build eye and a nose and a mouth and a ear, right. I am building abstract features, and then I put them together, create much more hyper complex abstract representation of that particular information which we are looking for, right. There are shared weight between them. Same detector is used across all the region, whether a face is present at the topmost corner or bottommost corner, you will still be able to identify, right. The weights are the same, even the regions are different. There is a spatial pooling process. So we are not sensitive to a shift in spatials, right, where the human face is. There is a tolerance to it. That's a spatial pooling. That's a key findings. What's the goal for us? When we design a neural network which process this visual information, that should preserve the spatial structure. They should move away from the conventional fully connected network to something which can have local processing, something which can extract the hierarchical processing ability to extract abstract features. They should have shared weight. You can't say for this region this weight, that region another weight. That's what we need to do, right? We know there are limitations on fully connected network for processing visual data. If you think about it, I am going to do a multilayer perceptron and an image of 5 tall cross 5 tall pixels, and I am going to take this 5 tall cross 5 tall and make it as a vector. Think about the dimension that we are talking of. So much weight. First, the spatial information is lost. That's somehow we see what to do. But look at the dimension of input. Phenomena. The weights that you need to store, which will be very, very high. If the more weights, more data. Right? Getting data itself is a problem with the distribution that what we are talking about. Right? When the moment a vision comes into picture, the illumination, right, viewpoint, occlusion, everything going to come into picture. Right? That becomes a bigger issue. On top of it, the intra-class variations also. Right? How does it look like? Those are the bigger problems that we need to really worry about. Moment we use the spatial, where the image is. If I look at this lecture, my image appears on the bottom, left corner. Think about it, they can put it on the top corner also, right? So will you say that, okay, moment it changes, I can't identify the face, right? So it should have spatial, no spatial awareness is there in MLP, that's going to be a bigger problem, right? Translation equivalent, right? Some features at a different location requires different weights. That's a problem, right? So this limitation led to first architecture called Neocognitron. Okay, this has a historical significance. It's the first architecture explicitly implemented for extracting hierarchical features, right? They demonstrated that this particular architecture is spatially invariant, can emerge from structures of the architecture. The feature can emerge from the structure of the architecture. If somehow we have to connect, you must be hearing a lot of new architectures, right? It's a distance ancestor for, early LeNet or AlexNet to our modern architecture that what we have, right? YOLO, you name it, this is a distant ancestor for our deep learning neural network. If I talk from the point of view of characteristics of this architecture, I mentioned earlier, it has a hierarchical structure, process the visual information through multiple layers, extract simple and process the simple information to complex, then to hyper complex information to extract abstract features from the image. It closely resonates with respect to our visual cortex representation. They have alternating S cell and C cell. S means simple cell, C means complex cells. The alternating simple cell and complex cell, they could able to extract the features, abstract features from the data. The learning used here is unsupervised manner, right? It's more like a competitive winners take all kind of an approach, right? Competitive learning. Now, what you need to understand, it has a spatial network. Let's say there is a 2D array of pixels, right? That's my image. And there is a filter which is extracting a feature, right? That particular array, right? This is a bigger image and I am using this particular patch, and from that patch I am going to extract something, right, and the extracted information I am representing it as a single point here. Then I slide this patch, extract and represent it in another pixel, right. So I can process the patch of information to extract something and represent it in different dimension, right. That is the transformation. I am extracting local information and attribute it to some, right, pixel in the next activation. So idea is connect pixels from a patch to neuron in the second layer. Slide the patch to generate more local features. Now I keep saying local feature, local feature. What do you mean by local feature? Which is a pattern detectable within the spatial neighborhood, right. Within the patch, can you detect a pattern, right. For example, can you see an edge, or do you see a corner, do you see a blob, do you see a gradient direction? The pixels are changing, right. Suddenly it was green, suddenly it becomes red, then that is a gradient, that I am color gradient. Can you see a texture in that particular patch, right, and that is what I meant as a local feature. The case of for locality, right, semantic content emerges from the local structure, right, like edges, corner, textures are part of configuration to build the mid-level features like eyes and nose, mouth in a face, right. So I need this local features. With the local features I can attribute to complex features and finally arrive at a template for human face, right, so that I can recognize. Now I can say a specific template for one particular person could have, it is not this one template, you could have multiple variations. So I learned from my experience how a face look like. Think about it, you have not slept for 2-3 days. What will happen to your face, right? So you can look at all kind of variations that you understand over a period of time in your experience and then add that to a template. And then you can identify, okay, this is a face. Then you can say, you look so tired. Think about it. How do you identify tiredness from a face, right? So we need to extract such complex observations, right? You look so happy. You look so sad. It's an emotion, right, we are talking about. You need to pick it up from your face. How do we attach those attributes to the basic templates, right? Then identify the emotions to it. Now look at a little further, compositionality of the object, right? Objects are composed of simpler local parts in a specified spatial relationship, right? I just talked about it, eyes and nose and mouth. I want to see 2 eyes in a face. If part of the face is occluded, still I will be able to reflect, okay, this is occluded, there should be another eye on this side of it, right? So you need to identify the local part, and the spatial significance of the local parts is very, very important. And that helps you to generalize across the domain, change in domain, right? How the domain changes. He has not slept for 2-3 days, that is a change, right? How does the face look like? Happy, sad, all that, how it will change, I can understand if you can have a composition of objects. Moment you have this, it is robust to perturbation, right? Sometime you can crop, you can just give only eyes, 2 eyes alone. You can figure it out, right? There could be occlusion, there could be a clutter, some person standing behind the bush. Still you can identify the face, right? And robustness to perturbation. Data efficiency and inductive biases comes into picture. Locality introduces inductive bias, right? The weight sharing reduces the need of massive data. That's very important. I share the same weights for all the regions, so I don't need a massive weight, right? That's an interesting aspect. If you look at the global structure is also very important. The spatial relationship of the local features require non-local reasoning to understand the scene, to understand the context in which the object being present. Say apple is in a dining table, apple in a shop, right? Apple in a box, Apple logo in your computer, right? It does a different context. It's present in different scenes at different scales. You need to understand the scene by just understanding the other objects present, right? That requires it needs a global reasoning, right? That's very important. Summary: this particular lecture covers what is a problem in visual perception with the fully connected neural network. We talked about a classical neuroscience experiment, and that helps us to understand how the human visual cortex being present. And we understand that it has a simple cells and complex cells and it processes the data in a hierarchical fashion. And with that inspiration, we talked about classical Neocognitron architecture, and we talked about its importance and what it exactly processes. Then we defined what is local feature, what is spatial network for local features, right? The robustness and global information to get the semantics, right? We talked about the complexity in processing the visual data. In the next lecture, we introduce the fundamental component of convolution neural networks, and we may take like what we did in multi-layer perceptron, we will also do a single one-dimensional convolution neural network to understand various building block of CNN to appreciate a simple problem. Then we move on to aerial perception problems in the subsequent module. Thank you.